who don't know, Meredith Foster is a sort of beauty lifestyle influencer slash YouTube who I have followed sort of on and off over the years because I just get fascinated by these people. She's so beautiful, she's so successful, you know, we all have those sort of guilty pleasure YouTube watchers, I think, and that sort of genre can be part of mine. But I've stopped watching her sort of recently because I've seen that she's becoming more and more religious, which to me, someone with a background in a high demand religion who kind of became religious in their late teens at a time when I was sort of vulnerable, it can be a little bit triggering or just sort of upsetting seeing the ways that she is developing sort of the same harmful mindsets that I developed, thinking that they're good. So today I just want to address one of her recent videos, which is about essentially why she's choosing to not have sex until she gets married. I think based on her other videos I've seen that she has had sex before, but in kind of non-committed situations, in a way that didn't make her feel good. So that's kind of the context. And in this video I just want to talk a little bit about why what she's sort of teaching is harmful and what she's not realizing. So Meredith talks about how she's been a Christian her whole life, she grew up Christian, so it's not surprising that she is still Christian. Most people in the world throughout history have tended to follow the religion that they were raised with. This is because as we grow up, our brains are shaped and formed by whatever we're taught about things like religion. So literally the ways our brains work, the way they see the world, the way they're programmed, so to speak, is directed, shaped by influences like religion. So if you grow up Christian, you will just naturally see the world through a more Christian lens, just like if you grew up Muslim, you will probably see the world through a more Muslim lens. You know, we are so shaped by our conditioning. We are the products of our genetics and our conditioning, our experiences. And so it's not surprising that someone who grew up Christian is still Christian. It's also not surprising that she's becoming more zealous in early adulthood, because as we know from research, people in their late teens and, you know, early adulthood tend to be the most at risk for joining high demand religions and cults. I think just because of the nature of growing up, this is a time in your life when you have a lot of questions. It's also a time in your life where you are somewhat vulnerable and impressionable, but you're also old enough to think that you can figure stuff out. So I joined Mormonism when I was 17, and yeah, it's not surprising that Meredith is becoming more religious, you know, as a 23-24-year-old. It's worth mentioning that Meredith also recently has spoken about how she's recovering from an eating disorder, which I observed over the course of a couple of years and did seem to get really quite bad. And for those of you who aren't super familiar with eating disorders, they are about having unhealed pain, basically. They're not, you know, even though there's these factors that come into it, like wanting to look a certain way, and I'm sure being a lifestyle influencer, Meredith was kind of influenced negatively by that. But you don't just develop an eating disorder because you want to look a certain way. It's rooted in this desire for control, you know, the illusion of control over something in your life, and you know, it's a way that you essentially can channel your pain and trauma potentially that you haven't dealt with, anything you haven't dealt with, into something else. It's a distracting mechanism essentially. Eating disorders are about escape and escaping some sort of pain. So it's worth mentioning in light of, you know, me talking about how she is at that age where she's vulnerable to kind of becoming quite zealous religiously and all that stuff. She's also obviously gone through a lot for whatever reason. Like, I don't know why specifically she developed an eating disorder, or if she even necessarily knows yet, but you know, a person with good mental health doesn't develop an eating disorder, obviously. And you know, it takes a long time to recover from eating disorders. They don't just go away overnight. So to me it seems somewhat unlikely that she has healed completely whatever was behind her eating disorder. Speaking from personal experience, I also joined Mormonism, and at a time when I was sort of like coming out of a phase of my life with disordered eating, and Mormonism was, it was kind of like I jumped from one thing to the other, even though I didn't know it at the time. Both of them are just sort of ways that we deal with our pain to a certain degree. That's kind of a whole other video. I'm trying not to get too deep here because I want to be addressing kind of the specific things that Meredith doesn't understand, so I'll keep going. So Meredith also talks about how she has had limited relationship experience and limited sexual experience. She's never been in a proper relationship. and so her only sexual experiences have been presumably one-night stands or, you know, little short things. Or she's never been in a sexual relationship with someone for a sustained period of time and in a way where she felt good. I think it's pretty common for young girls to get themselves into sexual situations that aren't great for them, don't make them feel good, kind of make them feel bad afterwards because they feel used, just because, you know, maybe there is that pressure to, you know, want to be attractive to boys, whatever it is. But I think it's very important to note that she hasn't ever been in a healthy, normal adult sexual relationship, because obviously that's going to limit her perspective on sex, and it also makes it a lot more easy for her to say, well, all my sexual experiences, which have been sex before marriage, have been bad, and therefore sex after marriage must be good, you know, that kind of like false dichotomy, whereas there are actually plenty of people who have very healthy and positive relationships and sex lives regardless of when they started having sex, whether they had sex on the first date or, you know, after a few months, whatever it is. So yeah, she talks about that, and then she also kind of talks about how she's never had a good example of healthy relationships in her life. She's not really had that modeled for her. And she also says something along the lines of like, you know, I wasn't sure why all my relationships weren't working out and they weren't going how I wanted them to be, and I didn't know how to make them healthy. And then she sort of follows on by saying like, you know, and then I realized that it was Christianity and God and being pure until marriage that is the answer to that. And she's just displaying a lot of naivety about relationships. She's not acknowledging that, you know, you're 24. Most people don't have very healthy relationships before they're 24. She's also never been in a relationship, a proper relationship. So she doesn't really have any gauge by which to judge. And again, I think it is that inexperience and naivety that makes her so vulnerable to this ideology that, you know, being pure until marriage is the answer to all your relationship desires and struggles and all that stuff, because she doesn't have anything to contrast it with. She doesn't have, like she said, she doesn't have any healthy behavior to sort of model herself after, so she's fallen into this delusion that Christianity is the answer when it's not. She's fallen into this false line of thinking that Christianity and being close to God and not having sex before marriage are, you know, how you create a healthy relationship, when actually a lot of religious and specifically Christian people's marriages are very unhealthy because they don't understand concepts of codependence and being connected with your inner child. I just read a book called Inner Bonding, that's so good, so I'm on a big inner child reparenting kick right now. You know, our society doesn't teach us how to have healthy relationships. Our model for love in society tends to be codependence, meaning that people aren't showing up to relationships as two whole people who aren't expecting the other to be responsible for their feelings. We don't learn about that. We get such a bad view of relationships from the media and from society, and, you know, because typically our relationship ideals in society have been rooted on Christianity and patriarchy and, you know, the ideas that Meredith is almost going back to. So for me, I'm 27 years old and I've been studying psychology and relationships for like the last 3 or 4 years, and I'm just now starting to figure out, well, I mean, I've been in a healthy relationship now for 2 years, but now I'm starting to have a good understanding of why it's healthy and sort of the framework that makes a healthy relationship. And it took a ton of learning, you know. It certainly wouldn't be something that you could just get from becoming Christian or any of that stuff, and obviously there's magical thinking involved in Meredith's ideology, because I know how it feels to be religious and think that, you know, when you're united, when the three of you are connected to God and you're united in Christ or whatever, then, you know, you can have a relationship be so successful. But history has shown us that that is not the case. Meredith has also talked about the Bible a number of times and how she wants to follow the Bible. She loves the Bible, I think she said. And it seems pretty clear that she isn't fully cognizant of what the Bible actually teaches, and she's no doubt sort of following this new age interpretation of the Bible that modern people have to do to be able to make the Bible still be like a holy book in their minds, which means minimizing or ignoring the really obvious problems in the Bible, such as women being treated like objects, God literally being okay with women being raped, with, I mean, genocide separate from women, but women always seem to get hurt the most, with, you know, women being treated literally like property, like bought and sold as if they're property, and just this really patriarchal view of women and men and relationships, which is so toxic and has been so toxic throughout history. So this is really common. Most religions kind of follow this trajectory where there's this holy book with a lot of really shitty stuff in it, because every holy book is written by men of that time who have obviously very different ideas about morality. And then over time, people have to start changing how they view it and minimizing the bad parts and ignoring certain parts and reinterpreting it to be able to still believe that it's a holy book. Because if you just look at the book as it is, you're like, holy shit, this stuff is terrible. Like, women are not property to be bought and sold. Why would God be okay with rape? Why would he be okay with genocide? Why would he be okay with infanticide? You know, all this stuff is just, it doesn't add up. So that's why every religion, including Christianity, and clearly the branch or vein that Meredith follows, does this, you know, has to change what was originally sort of said in scripture to be able to still believe that it's a holy book in 2019. So human beings evolved to be religious because it helped foster cooperation between tribes. The reason we've been so successful as a species is not because we're the smartest or the strongest or the fastest or anything like that. It's because we were able to work together in such large numbers through tribalism, and, you know, there's strength in numbers. So belief in shared myths, religion, helped us to cooperate with people who, without religion, we maybe would have seen as our enemies in the wild and stuff. It sort of helped form this group cohesiveness that really benefited us as a species. And it's for that reason that we do have it within our brain chemistry, brain biology, whatever you call it, to subscribe to magical thinking. Science has shown that there are certain parts of the brain that light up when we have a spiritual experience. And they've been able to simulate those experiences in the lab. Like, they can now create, like, you know, that feeling, that transcendent feeling you get that I'm sure Meredith has talked about, of feeling like God loves you and he's there for you, whatever those, you know, really significant spiritual experiences are that sort of convert you so deeply to a religion. They can now produce in people's brains in a lab through the right stimuli. So just something interesting to focus on. I don't get the sense that Meredith is particularly passionate about psychology or neuroscience or anthropology, but I mean, she's talked about a few like mindfulness things, but it's always very through the lens of Christianity. So she's not super educated in that area, just like I wasn't. Well, maybe by 24 I was starting to learn about it, but you know, when I joined religion, I wasn't either, and that's what made me so susceptible to it. Homo sapiens are sexual beings, and religion has historically exploited our most sort of base instincts as a way to control us, and also, you know, it's a way that we have sought the illusion of control. Like, religion has always been trying to control people, but it's worked for a reason. Like, we want to be controlled, we want like a framework, and we want rules, and like we actually respond really well to that, and we want to believe that there's someone in authority who can tell us what to do. That's just kind of what we crave as a species. And this whole idea of purity that Meredith subscribes to it's essentially ignorant of science and the psychology of healthy relationships and of healthy sexuality. And I'm not trying to say that anyone has to have sex before marriage. You know what, I am kind of saying that people should have sex before marriage to be healthy, because to say otherwise is to deny the importance of sexual compatibility. So, you know, for Meredith, if she follows her plan to not have sex before marriage, you know, she'll be committing to someone for the rest of her life, and in the Christian view, I suppose, eternity, perhaps, without knowing if they're sexually compatible. And it's very easy to dismiss that when you have magical thinking, when you believe in a God. It's very easy to dismiss that, and you think, well, God will make it work or whatever. But it's just not true. You can ask, you know, I know a Mormon sex therapist who just has endless couples come in and talk about their struggles, you know, because people don't have sex before marriage, and by the time you're having sex, you're expected to already be completely committed to the person forever. So you're setting up all these kinds of expectations, and, you know, expectations are resentments waiting to happen is a phrase I really like. And one of the reasons that relationships in our society tend to be codependent and unhealthy is because we have these certain ideas about how someone should treat us and how things should be that aren't really grounded in like healthy psychology principles and stuff. You know, for example, just the fact that we're all so codependent and we think that another person should complete us. And I think Christians and patriarchal religions especially espouse that idea. And I don't know if Meredith is aware of this, but in the Bible you can find perfect justification for women having to sort of submit to their husbands sexually, which I know from talking to tons of women who have left Christianity in various forms and other religions, causes so many problems in marriage, because you know, men feel entitled for women to have sex with them, even though they might not be good at sex, they might not know how to be, you know, sort of focused on women when they have sex, they don't know how to be a good partner. They have a very selfish view of sex, and then women don't know how to say no, and so it just messes up their sex drive, and everything just becomes difficult. And I've spoken to so many women in religious marriages who have this issue where there just isn't that healthy sexual relationship, because, you know, they weren't taught how to have a sexual relationship. All they were taught was don't have sex till marriage, and that just causes so many problems. So Meredith has essentially been sold this fantasy that if you, you know, are just faithful and you're Christians together, you're united in Christ, you are pure before marriage, that your marriage will be wonderful. And this is just not realistic. It's also very likely that if you're not having sex before marriage, that you will go into marriage a lot sooner than you might otherwise, and you will miss a lot of things because of that. You will miss a lot of yellow or red flags, because, you know, there's that incentive to get married faster, and so that lands people in situations where they don't necessarily know the person as well as they should, but they're married to them, and then they have to try and make it work, and that is just a recipe for codependency and disaster. I think it's interesting that she's been quite defensive on social media about not being ashamed of the fact that she loves God, and so therefore she's going to not have sex till marriage, because nobody I've seen is really trying to shame her. I think I've seen a lot of comments where people are just trying to get her to realize, like, this is a harmful ideology that is not rooted in healthy psychological principles or whatever. You know, there are obviously a lot of religious people that have followed the trajectory that she thinks is going to be this, like, amazing trajectory to go down and kind of lead to this, to a degree, fairy tale ending, who are telling her, you know, this isn't what you think it is. So to interpret it as, you know, I'm being shamed feels quite projecty. It feels like, you know, she's the one sort of espousing shame ideas, you know, the idea that there's this deity who's disappointed in you if you have sex before marriage. Like, that is a very shame-based view of sex, and shame-based views of sex lead to bad sex, which is why so many Christian marriages are bad sexually, because shame-based views of sex aren't healthy and don't lead to good sexual relationships, especially for women, who I think are most impacted by these shame-based purity culture teachings. Meredith is another one of those Christians who talks a lot about wanting to follow Christ, but then she believes in such a dogmatic, petty version of Christ and God, when, you know, Christ taught people to see through socially constructed ideas about reality, to see through dogma, to see through the arbitrary rules that, you know, the Pharisees would set up about what, you know, what is good, what is moral. And Christ just taught us to love people. I personally think Christ was trying to tell people about the value of ego death. I think when he said, forgive them for they know not what they do, or, you know, forgive 70 times 7, all his stuff about forgiveness, that was because he understood that we're all just the products of our genetics and conditioning. Anyway, that's a whole other topic. I've talked about free will in different videos, but I'm just trying to say, even within, you know, a Christian framework, like, I personally think Jesus was an enlightened thinker, and I don't think he is about this version of Christianity at all. I don't think he was any kind of deity or any different from a regular man. I just think he had some good ideas that other spiritual teachers throughout history have espoused, like Buddha and other people. So yeah, I don't know, the whole thing with Meredith is just pretty disappointing to watch unfold, and I guess I just hope she gets wiser as she ages, and that she learns about psychology, she learns about relationship theory, and all this stuff. But yeah, right now she's just, like, parroting these like shitty analogies that a lot of people who grew up religious who watch this channel can relate to, kind of like the chewed gum analogy or the licked cupcake analogy. I can't remember what the analogy was that she used. She talked about this preacher that she watched, and he basically used one of those analogies along those lines, which is really dangerous. That's a whole other thing we could go into. Like, a lot of, you know, rape and incest victims, religious rape and incest victims, have suffered a lot because of those teachings. You know, this idea that you're somehow tainted if you have sex, and it's all just malarkey. Like, it's so out of touch with how our species evolved, because it's magical thinking. Like, to be a Christian in the way that Meredith is a Christian, you have to really not understand evolution properly, or you have to have these certain cognitive biases in place. You have to, like, warp it somehow, because when you really understand how Homo sapiens evolved, you realize that, like, what matters with sexuality in 2019 is consent. And yeah, Christianity and purity culture teachings are also not great for that, because of, you know, the Bible's teachings about how women should submit to their husbands. But my camera cut out, so I think that's a good time to end this video. Thanks for watching. Share with me your thoughts in the comments below. I will link Meredith's video for anyone who's interested. I will also link Mr. Atheist's response to it. I just thought I'd come on and do a little video about it. I figured I might be a less scary figure for Meredith to watch than Mr. Atheist. Not that Mr. Atheist is scary at all, but just because I'm, you know, a young woman like her. And yeah, hope you're all having a good day. Please share some of your experiences in the comments below for anyone who might benefit from hearing them. If you like these videos, please support us on Patreon. We really appreciate it. There's also other ways you can donate to us if you don't want to do Patreon. I'll leave those all in the description box below. And thank you so much to our patrons for supporting us. You're the best. I don't know how to do a non-awkward intro. Outro.